Americans that visited Europe, what was the biggest shock for you? Italy, the abundance of inexpensive and very good red and white wines. Amazing. Amsterdam, most things are designed to be practical. The people are polite and practical as well. No large, fancy cars. Both places, the fact that I could jump on a train and get to most places in Europe was really cool. The amount of public transportation, and in many places people not driving or not even knowing how to drive. History. I followed a tour of American tourists into the church in downtown. Question gets asked. Is this the oldest church in town? Heard reply. Chuckle, oh no. The old church is on the north side of the river. This church was built in 1310. Just a different perspective on history. The only thing that really surprised me was how much pedestrians trusted cars to not hit them. Remember in The Sopranos, when Tony comes back to Jersey from Italy? And everything is ugly? I spent a month in NL and Louisiana, looked so bad when I got back. Complete privacy when taking a dump in a public restroom. It was hard to come back home just from that. The amount of smoking. I have a close friend in Europe. She's talked about the public transportation and the way the cities are laid out to be beneficial to walking and biking. But nothing prepared me for the amount for smoking I saw when I was in Paris, Helsinki, Tampere, and Turku. The age of all the buildings. Walked into a pub in the UK with a plaque that read something like, "This building was constructed in the year 2 and was used by monks to fend off dinosaurs." Maybe not the exact words, but you get it. First time in Spain, 22:30. Sun still out. Parents sitting, drinking, relaxing while kids run up and down. Felt so completely safe and comfortable. I was in Switzerland for a few days. I felt like the fattest person in the country at 6 feet 0 inches, 210 lb. It was also amazing to me that it felt like two different countries going from Geneva to Zurich. The language went from French to German with the architecture completely different between the two cities. Absolutely beautiful country. Those statues on the streets of London that people walk by and don't even spare a single glance. They've got a longer history than the United States. In France people get 2-hour lunches. Like some stores will have 2 separate open and close times cause they'll just shut down for 2 hours a day to enjoy themselves. Most people seemed much happier and relaxed as a whole. I was shocked by how many people spoke English, and so well too. Finally, I can walk to a store. I lived in Europe for 5 years, 2011 to 2016, specifically in Amsterdam. There were a lot of interesting little cultural quirks, of course, but there was only one thing I saw while living there that literally made me slam on my bicycle brakes and go back to see if I saw it right, which was of all things a Sesame Street live poster. You see, turns out Big Bird, or his equivalent, in the Netherlands and several other countries is blue. The Dutch will insist that it's actually Big Bird's cousin, Pino, but I wasn't fooled. You know, he just escaped to the Netherlands to seek an alternative lifestyle. So yeah, I'm sure Op wanted something more serious and profound, but that was the biggest shock for sure, because who expects that? I was surprised how many people still smoke cigarettes and how common it was to have people smoking in outdoor restaurants and bars. It has gotten to the point you almost never smell cigarette smoke in those places in most of the USA. Piccadilly Circus wasn't a circus. Europe is a lot better in public transportation. Lots of buses, trams. I've lived in Europe for most of the last 20 years. When I first moved here, the main things were the quality and efficiency of public transportation. Where I am from, Oklahoma City, there is almost no public transportation. The fact that sometimes when you go to the doctor they basically just tell you, yeah, you're sick. You need to go home, drink lots of fluids, and rest. In the US it seemed like regardless of what the ailment was you were gonna get a prescription for something. In my experience, people here communicate much more directly, and if you are not used to it, it might seem rude. The lack of a copay for things like doctor's visits, physical therapy, etc., along with a price cap on prescription drugs. The attitude toward customer service. Back home, in the US, I was a customer service manager at a retail chain in college. The standard practice was that if someone complained, regardless of how ridiculous the complaint was, we just gave them a coupon for 10% off or something. Here, if you are unhappy with the service at a store and ask to speak to the manager is probably just going to tell you to go shop somewhere else. If you hear about how big the Roman Empire was and all the advanced building tech they had, but it doesn't really sink in until you see it with your own eyes. Holidays. Europeans get so much paid time off. I've gotten into arguments with some of my American friends because they legitimately believe tons of Europeans opt out of taking their PTO because there's so much work to do. I don't buy that. People would riot. Anywhere I went in late July-August, there were tons of shops closed cause people were spending the month with their families enjoying their time off. That and public bathroom stalls going all the way down to the floor. Y'all understand privacy. How young the US truly is. Walking. My wife and I simply walked everywhere and I fucking loved it. Mile after meandering mile through historic alleyways and between towering architectural wonders, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and living the streets of Paris, Brussels, Bruges, Ghent, and Amsterdam was an experience I'll never forget. In Italy, the shower at one of my hotels had no barriers to keep the water in one general area. It was just a drain in the floor. Luckily it was just that one and it was definitely an older hotel. Also, I was really surprised that the price was exactly what the price tag said. I love that the taxes rolled in, especially while I learned the currency. Not a shock per se, but something of an immediate reorienting of perspective in terms of history and how young the US really is. We have cool historical sites and artifacts, but it's weird to suddenly be confronted with the reality that for as historical as Ben Franklin and the Liberty Bell are, they're borderline infantile on a global historical scale. I especially remember being at a church in Italy, reading about its history and initially felt a bit deflated when a sentence began. This is not the original church. The original burned down and was rebuilt on the same site, and thinking, ah, bummer, so. This is the knockoff replica, not the real thing, and then getting to the end of the sentence, in the 12th century. The knockoff replica is 600 years older than the Liberty Bell. My grandma took me back to England at the end of my 8th grade year to see my nana as well as where she grew up. I still remember quite vividly finding out that there's a very big difference between what's allowed on TV in England and what was allowed on TV in the United States regarding nudity. As a young boy, this was a very exciting discovery. Edit. I should also add that my entire experience with British culture had up until this point been through my grandma, who was very formal and proper. I played soccer at an incredibly high level in the States, so she managed to arrange a time for me to go play with a local academy team in Norwich for the afternoon. I'm still not sure how she managed to do this. I will never forget how foul-mouthed everyone was, coaches included. This took me entirely by surprise. I will also never forget how humbling that experience was because I was nowhere near as good as I thought I was. I could hold my own, but my goodness, I was certainly in the bottom half of the talent pool that day. How everything is less sugary, sweet. How people just walk away from minor vehicle bumps, scrapes. In the US they would pull over and at minimum exchange info, if not call the police. In France, the lack of casual wear in public, like t-shirts, sports clothing. How restaurants aren't about pumping people in and out and no one is really in a rush. Paris, much smaller size vehicles. Go to a typical parking lot in America and greater than 50% will be SUV or trucks. I barely saw any SUV trucks in London or Paris. I was surprised at how much walking I did. I did it because it was easy, not because I had to. You can drink a beer anywhere, anytime. I mean, I woke up in Berlin and bought a bottle of beer at a small breakfast stand in a park. It was like 6 a.m. I was not ready for how many overwhelmingly beautiful ancient buildings and cities I saw in only 2 weeks. I actually couldn't fathom what I was looking at. It was a surreal experience, like I was really in touch with a completely different era of humanity. There is absolutely nothing like this in America. It blew me away and made me really care much more about European history, urban planning, and architecture. That tax was included on the price tag. How small things were, like appliances, paper towels, toilet paper. I really wanted to take that idea home with me. It makes so much sense. Also, how conveniently close shops were, so we only drove when visiting other cities. I love it and I want it. I went to Scotland, ran across some German tourist who asked us to translate what the Scot was saying. We were all three speaking English. They just couldn't understand each other. How old a lot of the cities are. People still living in buildings older than the US. Walking down some of the old streets feels like your time traveling into a medieval fairy tale. When I lived with my grandparents in Europe and thus went to school, I was amazed how good the school cafeteria food was. The lunch ladies were actually cooking fresh, good and healthy food, and they were large portions to boot. When I ordered a small drink, it was actually small. Spain. Okay, it's afternoon. It's time to run some errands. It took me a week to learn that on days 2 to 5, the entire country shuts down. I'm Dutch, but I'll never forget my American girlfriend's reaction to seeing rows and rows of parked bicycles in front of the train station when she came to visit the Netherlands. Oh my God, look at all those bikes. Young children were using public transportation, i.e., city bus, subway, not escorted by adults, to get to and from school rather than a designated yellow bus. Where I am from, public transportation is barely usable by adults, much less children. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.